Welcome to StarSpeak with astrologer Maureen Richmond. Here's where you'll find the latest news on what's up with the heavens. Looking for the inner message from outer space? This is your place. So join me in welcoming your host, astrologer Maureen Richmond.
Welcome, star friends. I'm astrologer Maureen Richmond, and you're listening to StarSpeak on the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network. Today's date is January 24, the year 2024. I'm so glad you decided to stop by and have a listen to this important astrological information. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that the planet Pluto has moved into Aquarius. That's exactly what I'll be talking about for this episode of StarSpeak. Yes, Pluto has moved into the sign of Aquarius, the sign of the Waterbearer. Rooted in the Greek myth of Ganymede as the Cupbearer for the Olympian Gods and Goddesses, the sign of Aquarius deals with the free flow of life-giving energies. So what will happen now that Pluto is in Aquarius? Well, we're going to learn about that tonight from the Book of Life, taking a deep look at historical events which occurred when Pluto was last in Aquarius, which was way back in the late 1700s. It was then that British colonists in North America defeated the Crown of England, forcing Britain to recognize the United States as an independent nation. In the same period, the U.S. Constitution was ratified along with the Bill of Rights, and George Washington was elected for his first and second presidential terms. Yes, this all happened when Pluto was last in Aquarius. At the same time, the location for the American nation's capital was decided upon, and construction was begun on the building which would eventually house the United States Congress. Now, over in Europe, the French aristocracy was under attack and ultimately repudiated, as well as the whole notion of royalty, and a democratic form of government was established. In the field of science, seminal work in electronics, magnetism, and chemistry changed the world when Pluto was last in Aquarius. The first unmanned hot air balloons were launched, shortly to be followed by passenger hot air balloons, as humanity moved on towards the capability of flight. At the same time, the planet Uranus was discovered, and it was the first planetary body to be identified by telescope. As these examples suggest, the power of Aquarius to change the dominant paradigm is considerable. So this is what we're going to look at tonight. Now, Pluto goes around the entire solar system in 248 years. And so that's how long it requires Pluto to move all the way through the signs of the zodiac. So it's been a good long time since the planet Pluto was in Aquarius for any appreciable period. Now, if you've been listening to StarSpeak, you know that Pluto was in Aquarius in the year 2023, which was just last year, for a 3-month preview period. That preview occurred from late March through early June in 2023. And we had a little bit of a hint of what Pluto in Aquarius for the long term would bring. In this current year, 2024, Pluto is again temporarily in Aquarius. This business of switching back and forth between one sign and the one behind it is average when Pluto is in its transition from one sign to another. So there's nothing unusual or cataclysmic or worrisome about that fact. Pluto moved into Aquarius on January 20th, about 10 minutes of 7 Central Standard Time, just a few days ago, and will stay there through the end of August this year. That gives us about 7 months of opportunity to experience what Pluto in Aquarius will bring this year, as opposed to about a little bit half as much in the year previous. So we're going to get a better idea here in 2024 of what Pluto in Aquarius is all about. Now, the sign Aquarius is as important as the factor of Pluto here, because when Pluto is in any sign, it tends to focus the issues, messages, and learnings of that sign for us. It focuses it down into a pinpoint so we can understand the great universality of any astrological sign. In this case, it's Aquarius. We call Aquarius the Waterbearer in modern times, and the image that's associated with Aquarius is either a man or a woman holding a vase or an amphora or a jug, and pouring it forth in watery, undulating waves for the good of humanity. That's the Waterbearer image. Now, this whole image has its roots in a much older archetype that hails from Greek mythology, like about 4,000 years ago. And at that time, the constellation of Aquarius had a sign that, a story that went with it. And the story was related to Greek theological beliefs, which we now call mythology. But in that day, in that time, it was a spiritual path or a religion. In the stars of the constellation Aquarius, the ancient peoples thought they saw the figure of a divine cupbearer in the heavens. And so they reasoned a mortal had been lifted up by the great deity Zeus and taken to the realm of the divine, the realm of the gods and the goddesses up high on the Mount of Olympus. And that's what this figure portrayed. They went further. In the imagination of the time, it was evident to the ancient mind that this cupbearer served the gods and goddesses of Olympus when they would gather for feasts. And they would sit around tables and enjoy themselves and party and celebrate and discuss the great profundities of life and existence with no threat of time or death to mar their happiness. And it was all because they partook of what was in the drinking vessel passed around by the cupbearer. It turns out that Zeus had conferred upon this mortal who had been raised to the status of immortality the right and the duty to pass around amongst the deities gathered at the divine table the elixir of immortality. That's right. That's what was in the cup that the cupbearer was taking around and pouring into the goblets of each one of the assembled gods and goddesses. It was the elixir of immortality. And so that is the gift now that the constellation of Aquarius bequeaths upon us through the Waterbearer, the elixir of immortality, the ability to transcend the human condition. And that's what the sign of Aquarius today in modern astrology represents. Now, it's true that there's a difference between the constellations out there in deep space and the signs of the zodiac. But the imagery of the signs in the zodiac hails directly from the original constellations and their constellational mythology that goes with them. So that's the story that stands behind the sign of Aquarius. It's this whole idea of the mortal being lifted up to the state of consciousness of the stars and the capacity to transcend the human condition through imbibing the elixir of immortality. So, how do we imbibe that elixir of immortality? Well, we do it by drinking in through our consciousness, inspiring ideas and the truths of existence that go far beyond our planet. That's how we imbibe the life giving and restoring powers coming to us through the constellation of Aquarius. You'll recognize in the name of this sign, Aquarius, the root AQUA, which refers, of course, in the Western languages to the notion of water. And we see that reflected in the English words aquarium, aquatic, and aqueduct. There are words in the Romance languages that are even more clearly related to the notion of water that have this same root. So the presence of the flowing elixir that supports life is clearly represented in even the name for this sign of the zodiac, Aquarius. In contemporary astrology, Aquarius concerns a number of themes that flow directly from the story of Ganymede, the divine cupbearer. It's got to do with sharing in the same way that this common cup was passed around, sharing and creating community in the same way that the fellowship of the gods and goddesses was enhanced by their feasting and their sharing of the common cup. So sharing and creating community, and therefore with society, friendship, the transcending of small definitions of human existence, and the changing of paradigms. And we'll see exactly how that has worked out in the past here when Pluto was in Aquarius. Now, whenever a major outer planet such as Pluto is in a sign, it amplifies the themes associated. So now that Pluto is in Aquarius for about 7 months here in 2024, we'll see all these Aquarian themes amplified, strengthened, made more noticeable, more evident, more obvious, more present in our own thoughts, and more active in human affairs. So we want to know what this is going to generate. There's a way to explore that question, and it's simply to learn from the book of life. We learn from the book of life by observing what did happen under similar astrological influences. So we can look at when Pluto was last in Aquarius to answer the question, what's it going to be like this time? But I know what you're asking. Is it going to be just a repeat? If it is, what do we need to know? Well, the answer is no. It won't be just a repeat. It will be another encounter with the issues and meanings of the sign of Aquarius on a higher turn of the spiral. On a higher turn of the spiral. You know, we hear that figure of speech used, and most of the time it's just a metaphor, a higher turn of the spiral. It means after things have moved along somewhat. But in our case here, in our interests about the influence of Pluto's presence in Aquarius, it's not just a metaphor. It's actually literal. Why so? Well, it's got to do with the arrangement of our solar system and the orientation of our solar system to the plane of the galaxy as our solar system as a whole moves around the galaxy, impelled by the sun's passage around the galactic center. As that movement is happening, the whole solar system is being impelled forward in space. But it doesn't do this parallel to the plane of the galaxy. It does it almost perpendicular to the plane of the galaxy. The angle of inclination is about 62 degrees. So as the solar system as a whole, like a dinner plate, is making its journey around the galactic center, it's doing so almost perpendicular to the plane of the galaxy. So what that means is that as the sun drags the solar system forward in space, all the planetary orbits are tracing out spirals. So that's true of Pluto. And as it is going around the zodiac, it's also being pulled forward in space around the galaxy. So it's tracing out a spiral or a loop. And indeed, the experience of Pluto's passage through Aquarius now is some distance on from the passage of Pluto through Aquarius about 250 years ago. It really is a higher turn of the spiral. In other words, in this case, that figure of speech is not just a metaphor, it's literal. So no, this time Pluto's in Aquarius, it will not simply be a repeat of what occurred, but it will be related to it. And I think we should take a look at what did happen the last time Pluto was in Aquarius and see what the general themes are. Now, Pluto was last in Aquarius primarily between the years 1779 and 1797. 1779 and 1797. So that was the late 1700s. More specifically, back then, Pluto entered Aquarius for a while, then it retrograded back to Capricorn, then it came back to Aquarius for a short period and back to Capricorn, and then finally entered Aquarius to stay for about 20 years. And here are the dates in case you want the details. The first time Pluto entered Aquarius in the late 1700s, it was late January 1778. Late January 1778, and then turned retrograde and went back into Capricorn in late August of 1778. By early December of 1778, it was back into Aquarius and stayed for almost 20 years, from early December 1778 through mid-February 1798. After that, Pluto went into Pisces for a short period, then retrograded to Aquarius from late September, in late September of 1793, and then went on into Pisces to stay for about 20 years in late December of 1798. Now, that's a lot of detail to take in. I know that. What I want you to hang on to is that the core of the passage of Pluto through Aquarius took place in the years 1779 through 1797. And that's the period we're going to have a look at right now, year by year, so you can see how the situation evolved. As you listen to these developments year by year, think about what led up to these developments. What must have happened in order for these developments to have occurred? What was the condition of humanity? Here's a little hint. The condition of humanity was that humanity had been living under the governmental paradigm that posited the divine right of kings and queens to rule despotically over the mass of humanity by inherited right. And that had been the case for thousands and thousands of years. So let's have a look. As Pluto moved into Aquarius in 1779, a little unknown 10-year-old entered a military college in France His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. Yeah. He started his military career at age 10. This will become important as we move along. Now, a couple of years passed. Pluto was in Aquarius all this time. And what was happening in the United States? Well, about 5 years before, the Declaration of Independence had been conceptualized, written down, and signed. In 1781, that act bore fruit as a confederation of the United States of America as a document was fully ratified and came into force in 1781, and Pluto was in the early degrees of Aquarius. Around this very same time, in the year of 1781, the planet Uranus was discovered in Europe. The planet Uranus was discovered, and this was the first time that a planet had been discovered by the use of a telescope. Back over in North America, the Bank of North America was established by the American Continental Congress to finance the fledgling United States government. And that largely meant to finance the Revolutionary War. That's what was happening back then. In this same year, while Pluto was in Aquarius, the colonists who revolted against the crown achieved a definitive victory, defeating the British at Yorktown. So the actual fighting of the American Revolution occurred while Pluto was in Aquarius. The Declaration of Independence took shape while Pluto was in the late degrees of Capricorn. But the actual military conquest that led to the establishment of the American nation unfolded with Pluto in Aquarius. Well, it wasn't the only thing happening. In 1783, over in Europe, the first hot air balloon was set aloft, and not much longer, people tried riding on these hot air balloons. So this was some of the earliest known attempts at air flight. This happened under Pluto's passage in Aquarius back in the late 1700s. In the year 1783, also, there took place the Treaty of Paris, which forced the British government to recognize the independence of the United States of America. That was 1783 under the influence of Pluto in Aquarius. In science, a French physicist began publishing discoveries in the field of electricity and magnetism in the year 1785 with Pluto in Aquarius. Those experiments and conclusions had never seen the light of day before that time. Geology became a legitimate field of academic study in 1785. A couple of years later, there was a system developed by a French chemist, Lavoisier, for classifying and naming chemical substances. In North America, the United States was expanding westward past the Ohio River. In England, an anti-slavery movement began. And the final draft of the United States Constitution was prepared for ratification. This included the writing of the Federalist Papers in support of the concepts and specific provisions written into the Constitution. Are you hearing it? It is the story of the creation of the American nation. This happened under Pluto's last passage through the sign of Aquarius. A completely different governmental paradigm that had never existed before came into play. And as we will see in later history, served to inspire the entire world with the idea of a democratic society, a world in which each individual naturally had rights given by the cosmic mind. This flew in the face of millennia of oppression by the rulership of small groups that were exclusive and never allowed the common person even the right to choose the path for livelihood or profession. Pluto in Aquarius radically altered paradigms from the theological down to the governmental and the scientific, as we shall see. So this wasn't all that happened. In 1788, while Pluto was in Aquarius, the United States Constitution was finally ratified by all the states in the Union which existed at that time. Great Britain got the bright idea to expand and establish a colony on Australia. So the nation of Australia has its roots in Pluto's passage through Aquarius, and that's an important point. The very following year, in 1789, George Washington was elected to his first presidential term in the United States. So now the United States was a country with a constitution, a bank to support it, and a president. People in France saw this and had a conniption fit. They had been living for millennia under the thumb of a brutal aristocracy and monarchy. In the year 1789, inspired by the American example, French dissidents demanded that a constitution with constitutional rights granted to every person be established in France. They didn't get what they wanted immediately, and so there arose violent riot protests. The Bastille, a very famous French prison that held political prisoners, was stormed, and the prisoners freed by the peasants, the so-called peasants, in other words, the common people of Paris and the surrounding area. A great palace of France, it was gilded and up to the nines with indulgence for the enjoyment of the aristocracy and the royalty. Versailles was also stormed, and the, again, peasants, the common people, forced the then French king to follow the crowd back to Paris, where they would subject him to questioning and demands. Ominously, in that same year, the guillotine was invented in France. That was 1789. In 1790, over in the United States, the location for the United States Capitol on the Potomac River was finalized, as was the plan to establish a census to determine the size of the population of the newly created nation. Another major bank was established in Philadelphia, the Bank of the United States. That was in the year 1791. Same year, with Pluto and Aquarius, the telegraph was invented. So for the first time, humanity had a method or means of electronic communication at what was then unimaginably high speed. Pluto and Aquarius, electronic communication. Over in the United States, now that the Constitution was ratified, there came along the first 10 amendments to the Constitution in the form of the Bill of Rights, and they were approved by all the existing states at that time in 1791 with Pluto and Aquarius. In France, this same democratic drive manifested with the creation of a national anthem, 1792, and George Washington in the United States was reelected for a second term. Things got out of hand in France, and there were bloody purges, massacres of aristocrats and clerics. As the common people rose up in rage against the decades and centuries of suppression that they and their forebears had experienced. The then French government abolished the notion of royalty in 1792, while Pluto was in Aquarius. That's important. And then in the same year, political parties emerged in the United States. There's just a little bit more that I'll tell you, and then we'll go to break. In 1793, that guillotine that was invented a little bit earlier in this period was used on the French king. And that was the end of the reign of royalty. Also, over in the United States, construction was begun on the building that would house the United States Congress, pushing forward that notion of enshrining the democratic principle in the foundations, literally, the concrete foundations, the architecture of the nation. We're up against break now, so I'll stop here, but I've got more to tell you on the other side of the break, so join me after the break.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
Welcome back, star friends. This is astrologer Maureen Richmond, and you're listening to StarSpeak on the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network. Today's date is January 24, the year 2024, and I'm talking about the historical precedent set by the passage of Pluto in Aquarius in the late 1700s and how that pertains to our moment in history and what we're going to be experiencing on the higher turn of the spiral. Because yes, Pluto has entered Aquarius and will stay there through late August of this year. And then in the year 2025, early 2025, Pluto will permanently go to Aquarius. I say permanently, for about 20 years. That's a good long time. And it will generate changes in humanity because that's what it always does. What kind of changes? Well, the kind of changes that are native to Aquarius. If you were listening in on the first half of the program, you know that when Pluto was last in Aquarius, there were dramatic developments in human consciousness, in governance, in human relations, and in science. There were dramatic forward leaps in evolutionary progress as humanity rejected the notion of the divine right of royalty and reached out and embraced the idea that every single individual has rights and worth and inherent freedom to think for self and to determine a path of existence based on individual initiative rather than being controlled by an authoritarian regime. That's what happened when Pluto was last under Aquarius in the United States and in France. There was a violent rejection of the authoritarian paradigm that had been imposed in the North American colonies. That authoritarian regime expressed itself in the form of economic sanctions, extreme restrictions on trading rights, and as a result, a very depressing influence on the economic vitality of the colonists themselves. In other words, they found it difficult to maintain a comfortable quality of life under the demands imposed upon them by the British Crown. They rejected that violently, first mentally and then in terms of military action, to create a different situation. It was an experiment to see if freedom could be a governmental policy. Now, we could argue whether that intention has been maintained throughout the intervening 250 years. That's a different issue. What we're looking at tonight is what Pluto's effect in Aquarius did generate the last time it was there. So it created that enormous historical happening. Same thing in France. Though the violence, the degree of violence and brutality that resulted in the conflict between the old and new paradigms was even more ghastly than what occurred in the United States, which was well ghastly enough. Any form of warfare is. Underlying these disturbing methods of achieving freedom is the drive for freedom. And that's the power that creates these paradigmatic shifts. So let's look at just a little bit more of history to see how that worked out. While Pluto was still in Aquarius in the late 1700s, in the years 1793 and 1794, the drastic, gory, bloody political purges in France accelerated and continued. In 1795, over here in the United States, Thomas Paine, American patriot, published writings that attacked the effect of conventional Christianity on the rights and freedoms of the individual. 1795, while Pluto was in Aquarius, extreme questioning of existing theological power. At the same time, in 1796, over in France and Europe, throughout Europe, Napoleon, who had gotten his start at the beginning of Pluto's passage in Aquarius, was achieving massive military victories. That was in 1796 and 1797. And ultimately, Napoleon would go on to set up a type of democratic government for France. Now, that involved at that time the capture of the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, the capture of the Pope by French troops, because it was perceived at that time that the primary insults to freedom and democracy were the aristocracy and royalty on one hand, and the other, the church. The church, Christian theology as embodied in the Pope. So that was pretty extreme, wasn't it? Yes. And that's part of this rejection of the prior paradigm. So that's where things stood at the time that Pluto finished its transit or movement through the sign of Aquarius. So as you can see, the potential for thoroughgoing, comprehensive, and shocking alteration of consciousness, policy, and governing structure under the impress of Pluto and Aquarius is considerable. And if anybody thinks that this can't happen again, and that there aren't going to be any changes, and we're going to have the same old, and the entrenched and vested interests that are, say, for example, preventing disclosure, whether it's in UFOs or pharmaceutical accountability or any other area of governance, those who think that this cannot change had best look again, perhaps at history, perhaps at the history lesson that we've just looked at now, because time has already proven that Pluto's passage through Aquarius has a far-reaching effect on human thinking and evolution. The Book of Life has already told us what Pluto's impact in Aquarius is all about. And we've just looked at the pages of the Book of Life now for the last 20 or 30 minutes, looking back at what happened in North America and in France during the period when Pluto was in Aquarius. Of course, that energy affected people all over the world, but those two circumstances are dramatic and representative and worth paying attention to. For centuries before that time, France had been the intellectual center of Europe. In fact, the intellectual center of Western civilization, arguably, having inherited it from the Greek and Roman incarnation of knowledge. Subsequent to this, the United States became the leading light of the entire world, exemplifying a form of government that peoples in countries all over the world wanted to emulate. So these are not isolated examples. When we consider what happened in the British colonies and leading to the United States of America, or when we consider what happened in the nation of France, we're not considering just isolated examples that have nothing to do with other cultures and people on other parts of the planet. They're integrated instead. They are they're part and parcel of the whole experience of humanity and had effects reaching far out beyond their own national borders. These were, in fact, paradigms or models for the existence of humanity. How can we do this better? For centuries and centuries, humanity had been struggling under serfdom and slavery in various forms since the beginning of time. And all of a sudden, this whole new idea of how people could get along together and respect each other and respect each other's rights arose. And this was incarnated into governmental policy under Pluto's passage through Aquarius. This is not to say that these original ideas have been faithfully adhered to. We all know that hasn't happened. But the inspiration and the drive to make it real did manifest under Pluto's passage through Aquarius. You could say humanity had an extraordinary opportunity. And fortunately, there were intuitive minds and people of great conviction and courage able to receive that inspiration and act on it. In the United States of America, we call them the American Patriots. They were the ones who had the guts to let go of the old paradigm. What was the old paradigm? Well, the old paradigm was about loyalty to a monarch, to the throne, to the king. And that was how you attained to recognition or value or worth, or possibly even just a decent lifestyle, or anything that all of us might need in order to carry on. Food, family, a place to be. That was how you got it, through the bended knee, through bowing, through curtsying. When the king or the queen came down the road, that's what you did. You got down on one knee, you put your head down, and you swore fealty. You put your hand on your heart, ma liege. Yeah, that was the way it went, and if you didn't do that, you're out. If you didn't obey, if you didn't conform, if you didn't submit, you didn't have a place. As a matter of fact, you might not even be alive very long. You'd probably be eliminated quite quickly. Instead, this whole picture of the inherent value of the individual came to mind and was enshrined in documents and practices under the passage of Pluto through Aquarius. If that's not important, I don't know what the word important means. It seems extremely significant to me. It was an ideal, a dream, a hope, a vision that people had been contemplating for thousands of years. What would it be like to live in a society that values each human person and allows for individual choice and recognizes that each person is significant and valued simply because he or she exists and has been given life by the transcendent mind that created all of creation? What would it be like to live in that world? What would it be like to base interactions between humans on that concept? That was the big question. People had been seeking it, dreaming about it. Oh my goodness. Hoping that it would be possible, but it was so far out of reach for thousands of years. And here under Pluto and Aquarius, those very notions were concretized into word and print and put on paper and agreed to by the American patriots, the American colonists that participated in that, and by others in France and other countries. It was a whole new idea. It was a social contract between equals that had not happened before. And that is the model of Aquarius. So that's the storyline that's going to be amplified and intensified as Pluto moves through Aquarius this time around. So do we have any despots that we're laboring under currently? I think we do. They're not of the very same type. They're not enshrined in Versailles and the palace in England, although there are still those buildings, and in England, they do still have the royalty and the peerage, but those who oppress humanity now operate differently. They are the ultra wealthy. They are the ones who garnered and concentrated their influence while Pluto was in Capricorn from 2008 until current time. We can think back about the celebration of ultra wealth during that time and how it was presented to us as what we should admire. And then later in the years 2020, 2021, and 2022 was imposed upon us as a model of how the entire world would be controlled by certain commercial entities. We have seen the names Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum meets over in Europe, and it only allows those at the highest levels of financial power to attend, and yet wants to make all the decisions for the world's governments and how they shall govern their people. Or actually, the World Economic Forum and its related organizations I actually want to just take that over. It's just the same story all over again. So who is it that the common people and the, quote, peasants, end quote, might reject or repudiate? What kind of belief systems or paradigms might be summarily jettisoned while Pluto's in Aquarius? Well, I think that gives you some ideas of which ones. The ones that have to do with authoritarian control, the intention to standardize everyone, force everybody into, say, particular medical treatments or other things that these authoritarian bodies have in mind. These are the paradigms that are likely to be questioned, deconstructed, found fault with, and ultimately discarded by whom? The common people, the mass of humanity, and especially by the leading inspired individuals who are able to intuitively recognize cosmic truth and right. So that gives you a little idea of what Pluto's passage through Aquarius is all about. Now, for just the last few minutes of the show, I've got a little bit of time left. I'd like to mention to you that we've got some interesting energies coming up in the next few days, especially right away with the full moon on Thursday, January 25. That's tomorrow at 11:54 a.m. Central Standard Time. The sun will be in the sign of Aquarius. There you know, that's your friend, the sign Aquarius. And the moon will be in Leo, and the opposition will be from the sun at 5 of Aquarius to the moon at 5 degrees of Leo. That's coming up within just a few hours, and as with every full moon, tends to bring our thoughts to a point of clarity and everything around us to a high point of intensity. So we can look for that. That intensity doesn't really just go away, because right after that, we have a Uranus station on Saturday, January 27, and a conjunction between Mercury and Mars, which will stimulate thinking, conversation, dialogue, discussion, debate. These energies are going to be relatively strong, and these are coming up on Saturday, January 27. Shortly after that, there's a Venus-Saturn sextile late on Saturday, January 27, and then on Sunday, January 28th, two lovely trines, one between Mercury and Uranus, the other between Venus and Jupiter, which will help us all to find our comfort levels. And then on Monday, January 29, a lovely trine between Mars at 19 of Capricorn to Uranus at 19 of Capricorn. This all means that up ahead for the next few days, we have, to start with, a high point of intellectual activation, spiritual seeking, and motivation. That's right now through Saturday. Then following that, a lovely period on Sunday and Monday that will help us all put our lives into order, everything into perspective, and find some solutions for financial and other areas of life. So that's all coming up very soon. Thank you so much to everybody for tuning in and listening to StarSpeak here on the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network. This has been astrologer Maureen Richmond talking to you about the influence of Pluto in Aquarius as it is going to be seen this year and in the years ahead. I'll be back next week, Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, with more StarSpeak information. So join me then.